They say everyone's got a genius inside. It's just a matter of how do you bring it out. This is Robert Manni, host of Guys TV, and this week my special guest is author Gay Hendricks. He's got a new book called The Genius Zone. I've also got writer-producer David Assael, who's going to talk to us about what it takes to make it in Hollywood, right here on Guys TV. You can also catch me on KCAA Radio here in Southern California and on Guys Radio, my worldwide podcast. Guys TV, Guys Radio, thanks for your support. Okay, Guys Radio, we're in the interview portion of our show. I've got a very special show for you today. A great guest. His name is David Assael, and he's a real veteran of New York City, but also of Hollywood, screenwriter, TV writer, novelist, just an all-around expert on what goes on in Hollywood. And he's a really interesting guy. He's got some great stories. He's done so many different things, including he was a tutor for JFK Jr. back in New York City. So let me tell you a little bit about David. Born on the Lower East Side, MFA in fiction from Columbia, New York State Council of Arts Award for Best Fiction Novel, Where the Spotlight Misses. He's sold screenplays to Disney, Warner Brothers, Imagine, 20th Century Fox. He's written pilots for CBS, NBC, ABC. His TV credits and episodes he's written, famous shows, St. Elsewhere, Miami Vice, one of my favorites, Star Trek, The Next Generation, Northern Exposure, Picket Fences. He co-wrote the screenplay for Evan's Crime, which premiered at the Boston Film Festival. Executive producer on the film also, distributed by MGM. His screenplay adaptation of L.P. Leong's novel, The Jade Pendant, was released by Forest Films in 2017. He rebooted Northern Exposure for Film Farm. He executive produced 360 Degrees to Paradise. He's also writing the book to a musical called Insanity, which is under development. He's completed 2 episodes for the show Bible, which is a treatment for this new hour-long drama. And Allen Street, another original screenplay he's written, also Arrows of Time. His most recent project is called Glazed Over. It's a novel, and I'm sure it's about his time hanging out at a donut shop on the Lower East Side, but he's got a lot of fantastic stories. And the reason I really want to have him on the show is to get some information out there for you aspiring screenwriters and writers and novelists, and just how Hollywood works, what story is all about, and some of the traps you can look out for so you can step over them. So welcome to Guys Radio, David Assael.
Thank you. Great introduction.
Well, thanks for being here. And I think you've got so much to share. So let's start at the beginning. When did you move from the Lower East Side to Hollywood, and what inspired you to make that move, David?
Okay, I moved out to Hollywood around 1977, and what inspired me was Jackie Kennedy. I was tutoring John Kennedy Jr. at the time, and she said, David, maybe it's time for you to go out to Hollywood. I was also stagnating and as a tutor. I was getting very bored and restless tutoring, and some of the time I would try to cover it up and put like a partition between me and the tutee, and I almost would nod out. Mm-hmm. So I knew I needed a change, and I knew that Hollywood was where the action was.
She knew you were
meeting Jackie. Jackie suggested I go out there and start again.
But she knew you were a writer.
She knew I was a writer, and she was very helpful. And she really extended herself to me a lot. And I was very grateful and appreciative. And the first guy that she wanted me to meet was Mike Nichols. So imagine a guy, no credits. And my first meeting is with Mike Nichols. Of course, I screwed that meeting up.
Well, how'd that go? Tell us about that.
What happened is I had no idea what Los Angeles was like. And so I stayed at my hotel. So my meeting was at 4:00. So I always like to get there early and scout out the location like a cop and see where things are, in case where my escape route has to be, typical paranoia of a Lower East Side kid. So I went in 2 hours early. I went to this cowboy bar. I started drinking some beer. I started playing pool. 4:00 with the most powerful man in Hollywood, right? All of a sudden, I look at the clock and it's 4:15.
Oh my gosh.
Oh my God. This is my first meeting with the most powerful director in Hollywood, the hottest director. So I bolt out of the bar. I start running to the studio, Burbank, Warner Brothers. I'm cursing myself out for being another self-destructive guy on the Lower East Side who has no sense of reason and rationality. Anyway, I bust into the room. I'm out of breath. I went up a flight of stairs. I get in there. A beautiful assistant comes over to me and says, are you Mr. Assael? I said, yes, I am. And she said, Mr. Nichols is running a little late. He'll be with you in a few minutes.
Good.
So I got lucky there.
So-
Also, you
So
know,
what happened at the meeting? What happened then?
at the meeting, he was phenomenal. I gave him a screenplay, and he gave one screenplay that I wrote to Elaine May, his partner, the one that he didn't like, and the one he did like, he said, we will talk about it at another time. So he was very encouraging and really nice, and said, Jackie said some fantastic things about you. And that was it. I said to my wife, Lori, pack your bags, we got to go. And then as soon as I got out here, I got very, very lucky.
What was your first break?
I went to a pitch meeting, and I didn't realize that I got a meeting somehow with senior vice president at 20th Century Fox. And all of a sudden I go into this room, I pitch a story within, and I was pretty good at pitching a story. You know, I had a beginning, a middle, and end. It's a song and dance. I wowed them, I enchanted them, and I did a great job as a salesman. Basically, I was a car salesman. And I'll never forget the words of the senior vice president. He said, Delia, will you draw up a deal memo? And before you knew it, I had an office at 20th Century Fox. I had an expense account. And I said to my wife, Lori, I said, Lori, this is unbelievable. I pitched a story. Now I got a screenplay I'm going to write. I have an expense account. I have a big office on the lot. This is almost like going into a bank, stealing money, and nobody shooting at you.
Wow. So
So-
let me ask you, what was the screenplay, and did it get produced? What happened to that?
What happened? Well, by the way, those are great stories. What doesn't happen to screenplays, or what happens to screenplays, are stories in and of themselves. The day I finished, they had a change of regimes in the upper echelons of the company. So my project, that was the end of it. But I made a great amount of money. I had a lot of fun, and I basically broke in, understanding what the game is. And you got to be a great actor. You got to be able to tell a story between 12 and 15 minutes. You got to hit the high points at the beginning. The second act is always usually the difficult one to keep them interested in. And you got to do a lot of verbal pyrotechnics, and you got to be animated and alive and just suck them into your passion. And it works many times.
How important is, in your opinion, and did you follow the typical template of story? What does the main character want? Why can't he get it?
Yes, I did follow that template. But most importantly, it's them picking up on your animation and on your passion. You have a beginning, a middle, and an end. I pitched the story successfully to Brian Grazier and Ron Howard. And it was about a New York City fireman who falls in love with a first lady. So
Wow.
knowing the background, you can figure out a connection, right?
That's a real
Jackie
what?
Kennedy.
Oh, yeah, real.
I said, I didn't want to make him a tutor, because if he was a tutor, it would be too boring, too passive, and unglamorous. So I said, let me make him a New York City fireman. And I went in to pitch to, Ron Howard and Brian Grazier. And Brian Grazier stopped me in the middle. He says, this was in 1987. He says, does it have to be the president of the United States? You're going to besmirch an institution. I go, Brian. He says, can you make it the mayor? And I said, the mayor? You trivializing my story. You're localizing it. I want to make this mythic. This is a fairy tale. And I can tell it within the scope of logic and reason. So I have this great swashbuckling New York City fireman who never got married, lives on a boat in the boat basin on 78th Street, goes to a 5-alarm fire, and lo and behold, he climbs up the ladder, breaks the window,
Okay.
goes in.
So what happened with the story? What happened to
Another
the
thing,
script?
they
Yeah.
bought it.
That's
Okay, to my
awesome.
bought it. I convinced he can't, because Brian Grazier ran back into the room. He said, you're right, make it the president. I said, fantastic. They bought it, but what happened on that movie, I got paid for a decent amount of money, But what happened on that, they bought the movie Backdraft.
Okay.
That's what,
That's what I was thinking. Yeah, like amazing. So good for you. So you've worked on everything. You've done novels, you've done TV writing and film writing. For the benefit of our listeners out there, I've dabbled in all three. I have a novel, I've written a screenplay, I wrote a TV series. Very different. Tell everybody out there, what are the differences in your opinion?
well, a screenplay is all about story. And it's all about beginning, middle, and end. And what you had said in the beginning, it's classic. Who is the character? What does he want? And how are you going to screw him up and put obstacles in his way from getting to his dream? So it's all about obstruction, impediments, and blocking that guy from getting to his dream. So that's what you have. So in the first act, you got to have a problem. In the so my problem, just an example is in the
Okay.
5 Minute First Lady, the problem was this guy never fell in love. And now he falls in love with the most beautiful woman in the world, who's married to the most powerful man in the world, who can kill him in 3 seconds. Okay, they fall in love. What happens after that? So now the second act, first act concludes with a dance in Central Park. They fall in love, but the president has a wicked and evil chief of staff who wants to get this guy. So now you got to make the problem even worse. So she sees him a couple of times, and the chief of staff comes down very heavily on him. So at the end of the second act, you got to think, this is it. It's over. They're never going to get together. And then in the third act, you got to take it down even worse. Not only are they not going to get together, they're never going to see each other.
All right. So if the first act for our listeners sets up the problem, and the third act would be kind of the climax and the resolution, how would you label, if you will, the second act?
The second act is usually the most difficult because you got to keep things moving and you got to keep complicating the situation. So it's creating more obstacles and deepening. You got to compound the problem. It's a problem in Act 1, the end of Act 2.
Raising the stakes, right?
Yeah, it's overwhelming.
Okay. My special guest on Guys Radio, David Assael, went from New York to Hollywood like a lot of people have, but he succeeded, and his first meeting was with Mike Nichols. So amazing stories here. We're just getting started. So let's talk a little bit about TV, because it seems like the whole TV template has changed over time. It used to be that the main character on a TV show and the main characters, if you will, would never change. And then when you had these long form TV shows where the stories go on and on and on, and there's these troops of characters, it seems like there are some changes. What's your sense of how TV writing works?
Well, TV writing, when I first came out here, you could get a script. You can get an episode. So you were like an independent contract. So I could get a Star Trek. I can get White Shadows. I could get Saint Elsewhere, because I had good samples and I knew the showrunners. Now, I don't think that's possible anymore. I don't think you can make a decent living as a freelance writer now because all the shows are written in-house. And it's very different requirements for the main character. Then they always had to be likable. Now, darkness is celebrated. The darker they are, the more likely you'll sell the project. And it's all about casting. You can't sell, an 8-episode order unless you get a big TV name. So it's all about marketing right now, and staff jobs. So there are no more freelance episodes anymore. It's just everything is written in-house.
Okay. Tell us about Miami Vice. Now, I have watched over the shutdown. I decided to binge 3 shows. I watched all of Beat Bobby Flay. I watched all of The Ranch, which actually was very well written. And then I watched all of the episodes of Miami Vice. And I know your episode featured
Dennis Farina
from Chicago, and he was on 2 different episodes. So tell us about your experience with Miami Vice, how you got the gig, what the show was about, how it was working with, Don Johnson and the crew. What was your thoughts on that?
Well, I'll tell you the truth. The guy that was running the show at the time was a guy by the name of Joel Cerno. And Joel liked my writing, and he called me in, and I told him a story. And by the way, I knew Dennis Farina from the Chicago story. He was actually a real cop in real life. He was a homicide detective.
Really?
And then he made the trip, and he was
Wow.
in a thing called Chicago story. So I knew Joel Cerno. I came in with the idea about, Lombard, and I worked on this a few drafts, and then Joel took it and ran with it afterwards. and did the polish on it.
Did you go to the shoot or did you just
I
submit
didn't
the?
go to the shoot. No, I had a pretty good feeling for Miami. Miami Vice was really a music video. That's the way when they created that show, that was the template, a music video. So it was more about, the Armani suits, the fancy cars, the handsome guys, the salsa, the music. It was all about actually the characters of the story. I don't, were trumped really by the style.
Okay. How about Star Trek? You worked on the Next Generation, right?
Right. The name of my episode was The Icarus Factor. And I got to meet Gene Roddenberry, who was a hero of mine. And Gene Roddenberry wanted to write a story about his father. And it was called High Regard. It was initially called High Regard, but then it turned into The Icarus Factor. And he really basically just wanted to pay tribute to his father. And the secondary story they described as Worf making his bar mitzvah. He never made his bar mitzvah. That's why he was somewhat unhappy and filled with discontent. So he goes back and makes his bar mitzvah and he's satiated.
Okay. Were you a fan of the show, David?
Yes.
Before
the hard part of that show was learning all the lingo and the technology. And some of it was made up, some of it wasn't. So that was I had a whole read about 25, 30 pages of some of the phrases they used,
Okay. How about novel writing? I've written a novel. Our friend Larry's written many novels. I love how the process, and it's painful, but there's a lot of pleasure too. And you can really go to town with it, and you have to be careful not to go too far out there because you want to have a tight storyline. Tell us about your experience and what your thinking is about novel writing.
Novel writing is like going a mile. It's really long and protracted and really tests your character. I didn't publish the novel that the Council of the Arts gave me an award for because it was too painful for me. And I couldn't finish it, to be honest with you. But I'm trying to make the transition right now at this moment in my life into writing novels because that was, I thought, my strength. I could write lyrically and poetically. And a novel really tests your endurance in terms of language. But you can really say so much in a novel. You can do exposition. In a screenplay, you got to be fast, quick, to the point, and the story has to move. In a novel, you can take your time, and even if the story's not moving and the language is colorful and alive, that's your vehicle to move it forward. I think regardless of what you write, novel, movie, or television, the trick is to engage the audience and the characters and to keep that story moving at all times.
Got it. Okay, my special guest, David Assael on Guys Radio. Great conversation. I'm loving this. Tell us about your thoughts, David, about how the industry has changed due to COVID, and how do you think it's going to change now that COVID's over going forward? Are there some permanent changes that are now going to take place? I mean, so many things have been done with streaming and Zoom and all happening kind of at the same time. What's your perspective?
Well, it really depends on what your personality is. If you're an introvert, then I guess Zoom is very good and going to help you and be productive. However, if you're an outgoing extrovert, that's where your money is. That's where your value is. You get in a room and you can electrify people, and you have to have, for me, I like going into a room personally because sometimes I can have charisma. And the way I define charisma is you create the illusion that a party is taking place. So if in person, you can create that illusion that you're in a room, you're pitching a story, things are happening. And even if the executives don't agree with you, they say, this is exciting and electrifying. Let me buy this personality or let me buy this story. Once you go to the Zoom thing, it's all muted, it's unreal and somewhat, it's not concrete. And so I think the business, it really depends on your personality. Now, what's going to happen in the business? I don't know. I prefer meetings. I don't like Zoom meetings. I like seeing a person. I like hearing a person, and I like the spontaneity of it.
Okay. For somebody coming out to LA for the first time, they've got some talent. They've done some screenplays. They've done some TV writing. Maybe they have a novel. They come out. What would be your advice today? How do they get started? What should they do?
I think they have to have some proof. Or as Lily Tomlin said in her One Woman show, you got to have evidence. So that evidence that you bring to the table, it's got to be a script. have a spec. I think they're more interested in, see, when I was coming up, you had to write the show. Now they're more interested in a unique voice. So if you want to write a if you want to be a screenwriter, have a screenplay that's going to excite people and be political. You have to be political, because if you don't have access to entree, you're screwed. So you have to try to find an agent, and it's a closed shop. It's a rigged system like everything else. You got to find somebody that likes your writing. And so have a screenplay if you're going to pitch a movie or you want to get a screenplay assignment, or have a TV series that really reflects your voice, and try to get to as many people as you can get to. So it's really about access and entree. Not only, there are plenty of very excellent writers that never make it, and you never hear about them. And then there's plenty of mediocre writers, because they're politically connected and know how to play the game, do very well.
Great advice, David. Last question for you. New York, good old New York. I'm so glad I moved right when COVID, right before COVID hit. And I love New York from the bottom of my heart, but it's the last place I'd want to be when there's a pandemic. And I also found that the infrastructure in New York is falling apart. The money's not there. The subway's horrible. And it's just like, when I was in my advertising career there and things were going strong, it was great. Once I started to move out of that, I was like, I don't know if I need to be here. I'm having a lot more fun in Southern California. It's got its own set of issues. What do you think about New York City now? And do you go back there often?
I don't go back often, actually. I have three brothers, and they all passed away, so I don't really have. So most of my family's gone there, and I love Los Angeles. I mean, I got a life now that I only dream about. I got a swimming pool, so it's real hot today. I could step outside and go to the pool. In New York, I still love New York. I'll always love it. It's a great city. It's incredibly stimulating, but it's a lot easier being out here, especially if you can raise a family. I have two kids, wife. It's much easier out here than to raise them. I probably would have had to move out of the city because I probably couldn't afford it.
Right.
So my advice, I mean, I'd love it out here, but I still love New York City. And I'm going back there to write my novels. Interestingly enough, I'm going back into the past to really dig up the impact it had on me.
Got it. All right, David Assael, my special guest on Guys Radio. Great job. So many interesting stories. I'm an admirer of you and your work and your gumption, and you really got what it takes. So thank you for being on Guys Radio.
Thank you. I really appreciate it, and I'll see you soon, my man.
You got it. If you enjoyed the interview and you want to support our efforts to bring you the very best content to help you live your very best life, please subscribe to Guys TV here, or subscribe to my podcast, Guys Radio.